Carlos Alcaraz has been handed his draw at Indian Wells, and the first reaction from most of the tennis media was that it looks manageable. And they are right, that on paper it looks manageable. He has won this tournament back-to-back in 2023 and 2024, and has a record on the venue. He's coming off an amazing start to 2026. But there is something about the draw that nobody is talking about, and it is worrying. Indian Wells itself deserves a moment before the draw analysis begins, because the context of the tournament matters for understanding what is at stake beyond the ranking points and the prize money. This is the 50th edition of the BNP Paribas Open. Stadium 1 holds 16,100 people, making it the largest permanent tennis venue outside of a Grand Slam. For many years now, this tournament has been informally called the Fifth Grand Slam, a description that no longer fully applies now that prize money has been equalized across the Masters 1000 circuit, and Indian Wells no longer stands apart financially in the way it once did. However, if we are talking about atmosphere, prestige, draw quality, and the history of the results produced here, it remains one of the defining events on the calendar. The big three each won it many times. Federer won it 5 times, Djokovic 5, and Nadal 3. The list of multiple champions is the list of the sport's defining players across its modern history. Alcaraz, with 2 titles, is already on that list. A third would put him alongside Sampras and Nadal, behind only Federer and Djokovic. And his opening match is against either Grigor Dimitrov or Terence Atmane. Let that settle for a moment, because while the rest of the draw has been discussed at length in terms of Novak Djokovic in his projected semifinal, and Jannik Sinner in a projected final, and the broader narrative of whether Alcaraz can extend his winning streak toward the 41-match Open-era record that Djokovic set in 2011. The specific opening obstacle is one that deserves considerably more attention than it has received. Not because Dimitrov or Atmane is necessarily going to beat the world number 1, but because either of them, in the right conditions, in the right draw position, with nothing to lose and everything to gain, represents exactly the kind of first-round danger that has ambushed world number 1 seeds at Indian Wells before, and will again. This is what the draw actually says when you read it properly, rather than looking at the projected semifinal and calling it a favorable bracket. Start with Grigor Dimitrov, because he is the name most people know and the one that gets mentioned first whenever Alcaraz's section is discussed. Dimitrov reached the semifinals at Indian Wells in 2021 and the quarterfinals in 2022. He is comfortable in the slower desert conditions, where the ball sits up slightly and the bounces reward players with the kind of variety and touch game that Dimitrov at his best possesses as completely as anyone on the tour. He is a former world number 3. He won the ATP Finals in 2017. He reached the US Open semifinals in 2024, beating Jannik Sinner along the way in a match that reminded everyone who had drifted from the Dimitrov story exactly what he is capable of when the timing is right and the body is cooperating. He beat Sinner in New York. He has beaten Alcaraz before on multiple occasions across their career encounters. He is not a player whose name in the draw should produce immediate relaxation. The question marks around Dimitrov are legitimate. He missed Wimbledon 2025 with injury. His ranking has drifted from where it was a year ago, and the consistency that defines the elite players in the current era is something Dimitrov has never quite found across a full season. He is 33 years old. The period of sustained excellence that made him one of the most exciting players on the tour in his prime has given way to something more episodic, more dependent on finding a level that arrives some weeks and not others. After the Wimbledon injury, the analysis of his game described him as a shot fighter, rather than the flowing, instinctive ball striker he was at his peak, a player whose mechanics are visible on every ball, rather than embedded invisibly in the natural rhythm of his movement. It may also underestimate what Dimitrov is still capable of producing at Indian Wells specifically, a court that has historically been kind to his particular combination of touch, variety, and flat ball striking. But here is the thing about Dimitrov in this specific match. He may not even make it, because Terence Atmane beat him in Acapulco last month. And Atmane is precisely the kind of player who makes the Dimitrov of 2026, with all his current inconsistencies, vulnerable in a first-round match at a Masters 1000. Atmane is 23 years old. He is left-handed. He is 6'4". He is ranked 52 in the world after a 2025 season that included one of the most spectacular qualifier runs in recent Masters 1000 history. He came through qualifying at Cincinnati last August as the 136th ranked player in the world. He beat Taylor Fritz in 4 rounds when Fritz was the 4th seed. He beat Holger Rune in the quarterfinals. He reached the semifinals before losing to Sinner in a match that required a tiebreak to separate them in the first set. In 1 week, he went from a player nobody outside of the Challenger Tour had been watching to a player who Sinner described as having huge potential, and whom the entire tennis world was suddenly paying attention to. The origin story is genuinely singular. Atmane started playing tennis at 7 years old, not because his family had any connection to the sport, but because his mother decided it was time to put down the PlayStation. He had been playing Virtua Tennis and Wii Sports so obsessively that she bought him a racket and took him to a local club in Boulogne-sur-Mer, the coastal city in northern France where he was born. He has not stopped since. He is known on tour as the Magician, a nickname earned by his skill at sleight-of-hand card tricks that he practices between tournaments. He is reported to have an IQ of over 158, which he has spoken about openly in interviews. He keeps 3 cats. He is a Pokemon card collector of some renown, famously giving Sinner a Pokemon card as a gift in the tunnel before their Cincinnati semifinal. The kind of gesture that says a great deal about the personality of the player who produced it. He is, in other words, not a standard model professional tennis player. He is a specific and interesting person who also happens to be able to hit a forehand harder than almost anyone on the tour when he is feeling it. The Atmane game is not subtle. He describes it himself in terms that leave very little room for interpretation. He goes full on everything, takes every short ball and destroys it, serves as fast and as hard as possible, and accepts the risk that comes with playing at maximum intensity on every point. His forehand, coming from the left side, creates angles and trajectories that right-handed players do not face often enough to have fully automated responses to. His serve, particularly from the ad side, hauls right-handed opponents off the court into space that is difficult to defend. The combination of the left-hand angle and the sheer aggression of his ball striking makes him a genuinely specific problem even for players who have seen good left-handers before. He recently beat Dimitrov in Acapulco, which is the result that makes his first-round match against that same opponent feel less like a reliable opener for Alcaraz, and more like a match that could go either way. A wounded Dimitrov carrying questions about his form and his body, facing a player who just beat him less than 2 weeks ago in a first-round Masters 1000 match, where the loser goes home immediately, is not a match anyone should be confidently predicting from the outside. He is also making his main draw debut at Indian Wells, having previously competed only in qualifying at this tournament. That debut status works in 2 directions simultaneously. It means he carries no expectations and no history of disappointment at the venue, which is the psychological position that allowed him to play with such freedom in Cincinnati. But it also means the slow desert conditions, the specific pace of the Indian Wells hard court, the scale of Stadium 1, which holds over 16,000 people and is the biggest tennis venue outside of a Grand Slam, are all things he has not experienced at this level before. Whether the freedom survives the unfamiliarity is the central question about Atmane at Indian Wells. What is clear is that either of these players arriving in the second round against Alcaraz represents a non-trivial test. Not the kind of test that the projected path from third round onward represents, but a test nonetheless. Because Alcaraz's 12-0 record in 2026 was built across tournaments where his draw was navigable from the beginning. The Australian Open gave him a path that opened up after the first week. Doha provided a draw that he handled with something close to routine. Indian Wells, from the very first match, presents something different. Beyond the opening round, the path through the third round is manageable but not soft. Arthur Rinderknecht or Botic van de Zandschulp would follow a second-round win. Neither of them is seeded. Neither of them is a slam contender. Rinderknecht is a solid flat hitter with a big serve who has produced results on hard courts before. And van de Zandschulp has the kind of relentless baseline game that can absorb pace and manufacture points through attrition. Neither is the kind of player Alcaraz should lose to when he is 12-0 and firing. But the third round at a Masters 1000 is precisely where a world number one at near maximum confidence can occasionally underestimate the level required and pay for it. The fourth round is where the draw begins to show genuine teeth. Casper Ruud is the 13th seed and the most complete threat in that section. Ruud reached the Roland Garros final in 2022 and 2023 and the US Open final in 2022. He is not a player who belongs in the fourth round discussion as an afterthought. He is the kind of opponent who, on hard courts in conditions that do not fully suit him, can still produce tennis of sufficient quality to extend a top player into a difficult match. Ruud has beaten Alcaraz before. He is 25 years old and has navigated the current tour long enough to know exactly what is required to compete at the highest level on this surface. The quarterfinal is where the serious analysis really begins. Alex de Minaur is the 6th seed. Alcaraz has beaten de Minaur 7 times consecutively across multiple surfaces and multiple tournament contexts. The Australian from the outside looks like a comfortable obstacle given that head-to-head record. But de Minaur in a Masters 1000 quarterfinal, in peak physical condition, with the specific motivation of ending a 7-match losing run against the players standing across the net, is not a walkover. He is one of the fastest movers on the ATP Tour. He retrieves balls that most players have already mentally conceded. He serves consistently, and he has worked on his ground stroke depth and variety to a point where the game that Alcaraz used to solve him with previously no longer applies quite as cleanly. De Minaur is also one of the most mentally resilient players in the draw. He does not have the explosive ceiling of Sinner or Alcaraz or Djokovic on their best days, but he brings a consistency and a competitive intensity to every match that makes him dangerous in a quarterfinal context where the world number one has already played 3 or 4 rounds, and the physical demands of the fortnight are starting to accumulate. He is also the player who gave Alcaraz his most difficult match at Wimbledon in 2024, before losing in 4 sets. A match in which de Minaur was serving for the first set and had Alcaraz in genuine difficulty before the momentum shifted. The Indian Wells hard courts suit his game better than grass does. Alexander Bublik is the 10th seed in the same section. Bublik is the most unpredictable player in the top 20 and one of the most dangerous on days when the serve is working at the level he can produce. He owns the fastest serve in the history of the ATP Tour. He has beaten Alcaraz before at big events. He can also, on the wrong day, lose to anyone. His inclusion in the quarterfinal picture adds a variable that the draw analysis cannot confidently resolve in either direction. Then there is the projected semifinal. Novak Djokovic is the 3rd seed and a 5-time Indian Wells champion. He was the last player to beat Alcaraz at this tournament, winning their 3rd-round match here in 2022. He has not passed the 4th round at Indian Wells since 2016, a detail that is cited regularly as evidence that his best Indian Wells days are behind him. But Djokovic came to Indian Wells immediately after losing the Australian Open final to Alcaraz, which means he arrived in the Californian desert carrying both fresh motivation and fresh information about what Alcaraz's 2026 game looks like from the inside of a 5-set match. He knows the patterns. He has felt the level. A projected semi-final between Djokovic and Alcaraz at a tournament where Djokovic has won 5 times, and where the slower conditions have historically suited his game, is not the comfortable obstacle the 10-year absence from the final might suggest. Jack Draper is also in Djokovic's section of the draw, seeded 14th and defending the 1,000 points he earned by winning Indian Wells in 2025. The title that announced him definitively as a genuine contender at the highest level of the sport. Draper is returning from the bone-bruising injury that wrecked his second half of 2025, and the Dubai situation this week meant his preparation for Indian Wells was disrupted by an emergency departure from a conflict zone under conditions that nobody in professional tennis had planned for or prepared for. He could still be the player who faces Alcaraz in the semifinal, if Djokovic falls before that stage. Draper at less than full fitness, defending a title, with a projected 4th-round match against Djokovic standing between him and the semifinals, is simultaneously a more sympathetic figure and a more dangerous opponent than his current circumstances might suggest. Players defending titles at venues where they played the best tennis of their lives sometimes produce results that have nothing to do with their ranking or their recent form. Daniil Medvedev is the 11th seed in the same half after finally escaping Dubai through Oman on a private jet following the airspace closure and arriving in California with his draw position intact, by virtue of the bye that seeded players receive. Medvedev won in Dubai last week. He is in form, he is motivated, and he is a player who has beaten Alcaraz at Grand Slams before, most notably at the 2021 and 2023 U.S. Opens. His presence adds another layer of genuine quality to the upper half of the draw that makes the projected semi-final conversation more complicated than the simple Alcaraz versus Djokovic framing suggests. Medvedev in a semi-final against Alcaraz, after winning in Dubai and arriving via a private jet from Oman, would be one of the stranger tournament stories of the season, and also one of the more dangerous matches for anyone hoping the streak continues. The potential final brings everything together. Sinner is in the bottom half of the draw and is the 2nd seed. A final between Alcaraz and Sinner at Indian Wells in 2026 would be their first meeting of the season, the first time these two players face each other since Alcaraz beat Sinner in the Australian Open semi-final last month. It would be the 10th meeting between them since the rivalry began. Alcaraz leads 10-5, but Sinner took their last meeting on grass at Wimbledon 2025, which means the current form reading is less one-sided than the overall head-to-head suggests. Sinner, path to the final, runs through a bottom half that is formidable but navigable. A potential quarterfinal against Ben Shelton is the match that most people are circling in the bottom half. Shelton is loud, powerful, left-handed, and in good form after winning in Dallas earlier this year. Sinner is 9-1 against him in their head-to-head, which looks like an overwhelming advantage until you remember that Shelton's game, at its best, can overpower almost anyone on hard courts for a set or two, and that a Masters 1000 quarterfinal is exactly the kind of stage where the American plays his best tennis. Alexander Zverev is also in the bottom half, and represents the most complete threat to Sinner if they meet in the semifinal. Zverev beat Sinner at the French Open in 2023 and has always had the specific physical tools to make Sinner uncomfortable. A Sinner final in the California desert, on the surface where Sinner is most comfortable and most dangerous, would be the most complete test the draw could produce for a player trying to extend his winning streak toward 41. This is the draw. Not terrifying, not soft, a real test from the opening match to the potential final, with specific dangers at every stage that require full attention and full execution from the start. Alcaraz has handled everything that has been thrown at him in 2026 so far with a composure and a tactical clarity that has looked different from anything he produced in previous seasons. He said it himself on Tuesday in the press room here. He is in a calm place where he can find solutions. He controls his emotions better now. He has demonstrated both claims repeatedly across 12 matches and 2 titles. The Indian Wells draw is the most complete examination those claims have faced yet. Not because any individual opponent is definitively beyond Alcaraz at his current best, but because 7 matches across 14 days on the surface where Sinner is strongest, opening against a left-handed aggressor, backed by one of the most fearless games on the tour, with a 5-time champion lurking in the semifinals and the number 2 seed in the world waiting in the final, is the kind of sustained test that winning streaks either survive with their credibility permanently enhanced or stumble against when the margins are narrow and one match produces an answer nobody was expecting. The draw is mapped out, and Alcaraz opens on Friday. A third Indian Wells title would equal Sampras and Nadal, trail only Federer and Djokovic, and continue the streak to at least 17. Should he lose at any point in the tournament, then the most dominant start to a season any player on the current tour has produced will come to an end. The question of which outcome arrives starts with a match against a Frenchman who grew up playing video games, went from world number 136 to a Masters 1000 semi-final in a single week, beat Dimitrov last month in Acapulco, and who has absolutely nothing to lose. So Alcaraz has to brace up, because it might not be easy. Make sure to leave what you think in the comment. Does Alcaraz have a great opening at Indian Wells? Give me your honest assessment. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.